three forms of linear equations. So far in this chapter we've learned about the three forms. Slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, where m is your slope and b is your y-intercept. You see the example below. Standard form, ax plus by equals c. A and b are not both 0, and you see an example there. Point-slope form, y minus y1 is equal to m times the quantity of x minus x1, where x1 and y1 are points on the line, and m is the slope. And you see that example there. The graph of a linear equation is a line, and we know that. The x-intercept of the line is where the line crosses the x-axis. The x-axis is this side to side, so the x-intercept of this line would be at that -1. This line, you can't actually see where it crosses the x-axis, but eventually this line would continue and cross the x-axis. The y-intercept is where the point crosses the y-axis. The y-axis is that up and down line, and in this graph, the y-intercept would be at about -1/2. In the other graph, again, it's where it crosses that y-axis, that up and down axis. The y-intercept would be at approximately -3. The slope-intercept form of a linear equation is y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope and b is the y-intercept. So if you were going to look at these two lines and had to come up with the equations for those, you're going to need to find first the slope and then the y-intercept. The slope in this case, again, find 2 points that are on the corners of those boxes, and then you're going to find how do you get from one to the other. So in this case, you would go down 1 and to the right 2. So the slope, because we went down, would be -1 and to the right 2, or -1/2. The y-intercept, again, is where it crosses, and that is going to equal -1/2 as well. So when I write that equation, y equals, slope goes in front of the x value, so -1/2 x, minus the y-intercept, so minus 1/2. The y-intercept happens to be -1/2. Now for that other one, the slope again, find 2 points that are kind of on the corners of those boxes. And how do you get to 1? Up 1 and over 4. So the slope in this case is going to be positive. It's 1/4. Again, slope is rise over run. The y-intercept in this case happens to be -3. So when I write that equation, y equals, put the slope first, 1/4 x, and then you could also write plus -3, or you could just write -3. Slope-intercept form. Then, of course, we also have standard form. And standard form is where you find the x and the y-intercepts in order to graph that equation. In that case, you're going to write each equation twice. And in the first one, you're going to put x equals 0 and solve it. And in the second one, you're going to put y equals 0 and solve that. So 5 times 0 plus 2y equals 10. I get 2y equals 10. Divide both sides by 2. So y equals 5. That point would be 0 for x and 5 for y. I do the same thing on the other side, except now I'm going to put 0 in for y. So 5x plus 2 times that y equals 10. I get 5x equals 10. Divide both sides by 5. I get x equals 2. Rewriting that as a point, 2, 0. Of course, you need to graph that. So I'm going to graph this freehand. I'm going to put in numbers on my graph. Sorry that this is off a little bit. 1. That's a 6. So you just need to put at least a couple of numbers on your graph so that we know that the interval, what it is. And now I'm going to graph each of these points. I'm going to graph the y-intercept first, 0, 5. So I go left to right 0 and up 5. And I put a point there. Then that's my y-intercept. Now I'm going to graph my x-intercept. And that's at 2, 0. There's that point. And the last step is just to connect those 2 points. And that's how you use standard form to graph your linear equation. The last one is point-slope form. Point-slope form, without any numbers, looks like this. So our first step, we can use either one of those points. And so you can plug that in, y minus. If I use this first point, my x value is going to be that 4, so I can plug that 4 in. My y value is that 3, so I can plug that 3 in. Noticing that it is the opposite in terms of that equation. It's y minus 3, even though on the point it's a positive 3. Now what you're noticing is I'm missing that slope. So what I have to do is find the slope. And in order to do that, I'm going to take the change in the y values. So I'm going to do 3 minus 1 all over the change in the x values, 4 minus negative 2. When I do that, 3 minus 1 is 2. 4 minus negative 2 becomes 4 plus 2, which is 6. That can be reduced to 1/3. So the slope in this case is 1/3. That's using the point 4, 3. If I want to use the other point, I can do that as well. Same situation. Set the equation up with those blanks. Only now I'm going to plug in the other point. So now using negative 2, 1, I'm going to put the negative 2 in, the positive 1 in. I'm going to use the same slope, 1/3. Now these two equations, although they look different because of the different points, are going to graph the same line. Now the second equation I can also rewrite as y minus 1 equals 1/3 times the quantity x plus 2, because subtraction means to add the opposite. So when I have two negatives together like this, that means that they are going to become plus. Those are the three types of linear equations that we know how to write. We, again, know point-slope form, slope-intercept form, and standard form. And you will need to be able to go from each different form eventually as we continue through this chapter.